I was packing my last box when my adoptive mother knocked on my bedroom door, panic finally creeping into her voice. "Beatrix, you can't just leave like this," she pleaded, but I could, and I was. 24 hours earlier, I'd sat alone in our kitchen on my 22nd birthday, watching my adoptive parents rush around preparing for my stepbrother's soccer tournament. When I gently reminded them it was my special day, my adoptive father barely looked up from his phone. "We're busy with real kids right now, Beatrix. Your birthday can wait." Real kids. After 15 years in their home, I was still just the charity case they'd taken in. That single sentence shattered every illusion I'd held about belonging in this family. So I made a choice that would change everything. My name is Beatrix Finch, and this is how I discovered that sometimes the family you choose is worth more than the one that chose you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moving truck pulled away from 847 Maple Grove Avenue at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, taking with it the last remnants of what I'd foolishly believed was my life. I stood on the sidewalk, my single duffel bag slung over my shoulder, watching 15 years of memories disappear around the corner. The house looked different already, smaller somehow, like a stage set being dismantled after the final performance. Through the living room window, I could see my adoptive mother Camille Sterling pacing frantically, her phone pressed against her ear, probably calling everyone she knew to spin this story in her favor. The irony wasn't lost on me. 24 hours ago, I would have done anything to make this family proud. Now I couldn't get away fast enough. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled out my own phone and dialed the number I'd memorized that morning. "Oakwood Extended Stay Hotel," came the cheerful voice on the other end. "Hi, this is Beatrix Finch. I have a reservation for tonight." "Yes, Miss Finch, room 204, checking in for 1 week initially, correct?" "That's right, 1 week to figure out the rest of my life. 1 week to undo 15 years of believing I belonged somewhere I never truly had a place." As I walked toward the bus stop at the end of Maple Grove, my mind kept replaying yesterday's conversation, each word still burning like acid in my chest. I'd been sitting at our kitchen island, the same spot where I'd done homework every day after school, where Camille had taught me to fold dumplings during those early years when she still pretended I was just as important as her biological son. The kitchen had been chaos. 17-year-old Zephyr Stone, Camille's son from her first marriage, was wolfing down a sandwich while simultaneously packing his soccer gear. Her husband Daniel Wild was scrolling through his tablet, muttering about traffic routes and tournament schedules. Camille was running around like a caffeinated hummingbird, stuffing energy bars and water bottles into a massive cooler. "Mom, did you pack my backup cleats?" Zephyr called out, not bothering to look up from his phone. "They're already in the car, sweetheart." "Daniel, did you confirm the hotel reservation in Millbrook?" "Got it handled, check-in is at 4, check-out Sunday morning." I sat there invisible as always, picking at my cereal and watching their perfectly choreographed family dance. It struck me suddenly how natural it all looked, how seamlessly they moved around each other, anticipating needs and finishing sentences. Like a family that had been together forever. Which I realized with a sinking heart, they had been. Before me. "Hey," I said softly, trying to inject some cheerfulness into my voice. "So, I know you guys are busy with Zephyr's tournament, but I was thinking maybe we could do something small tonight, for my birthday." The kitchen went silent, not the comfortable silence of people thinking, but the awkward heavy silence of people who've been caught in an oversight. Camille's hands froze halfway to the cooler. Daniel's scrolling stopped mid-swipe. Zephyr, bless him, at least had the decency to look up from his phone with genuine surprise. "Oh honey," Camille said, her voice taking on that carefully modulated tone she used when she was trying to manage a situation. "Your birthday, right? It's just that this tournament is really important for Zephyr's college applications, and we've had it planned for months." I know, I said quickly, not wanting to seem demanding. "I don't need anything big, maybe just dinner when you get back Sunday. Or we could order pizza before you leave." Daniel finally looked up from his tablet, his expression a mixture of annoyance and something that might have been guilt. "Beatrix, we're already running late. Zephyr's team is counting on him, and this tournament could determine whether he gets that scholarship to State University." "I understand that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not asking you to miss the tournament. I just thought maybe we could acknowledge it somehow." That's when Camille said the words that would echo in my mind for the rest of my life. "Honey, we're busy with real kids right now, your birthday can wait." Real kids, the phrase hit me like a physical blow. I felt all the air leave my lungs, felt the familiar sting behind my eyes that I'd learned to suppress years ago. Real kids. After 15 years in their home, after countless family dinners and school plays and Christmas mornings, I was still just the charity case they'd taken in out of the goodness of their hearts. Zephyr had the grace to look horrified. "Mom, that's not what you meant." But Camille was already in damage control mode, the way she always got when she realized she'd revealed too much truth. "Oh, sweetheart, you know that's not how I meant it. It's just that Zephyr is at such a crucial point in his development, and stop." I said quietly, "Just stop." I stood up from the kitchen island, my legs feeling strangely disconnected from my body. The cereal bowl sat abandoned, half full of milk turning pink from the berries that had seemed so appealing 5 minutes earlier. "I'm going to my room," I managed to say, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Beatrix, honey, let's talk about this when we get back." Camille called after me. "We can have a big celebration then." But I was already walking away, already climbing the stairs to the bedroom that had never quite felt like mine despite 15 years of trying to make it home. Each step felt heavy, final, like I was walking away from more than just a conversation. In my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the walls I'd decorated so carefully over the years. There were photos everywhere, pictures of family vacations and birthday parties and school events. But looking at them now, really looking, I started to notice things I'd been willfully blind to before. In the beach vacation photo from 3 summers ago, Zephyr was in the center, arms around both parents, all 3 of them laughing at something off camera. I was there too, off to the side, smiling but somehow separate from their little triangle. The Christmas morning pictures told the same story. Zephyr surrounded by piles of carefully chosen gifts, his excitement radiating from every photo. Me with my smaller stack, grateful smile firmly in place, playing the role of the thankful adoptee who never asked for too much. How had I never seen it before? How had I convinced myself that this was normal, that this was love? My phone buzzed with a text from my coworker Joanne Hayes. "Happy birthday, girl, can't wait to hear about your family celebration tonight." I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. What was I supposed to say? That my family forgot my birthday because they were too busy with their real kids? That after 15 years, I was still just a guest in their home? Instead, I turned off my phone and lay down on my bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet now. They'd left for Millbrook without saying goodbye, without even a token "we'll celebrate when we get back." The silence felt different this time, not peaceful but hollow, like the echo in an empty room. That's when I made my decision. I got up and opened my closet, pulling out the old duffel bag I'd brought with me 15 years ago. It was smaller than I remembered, faded blue canvas with my initials embroidered in yellow thread, by some long-forgotten social worker who thought it might help me feel ownership over anything. I started packing methodically, taking only what was truly mine. Clothes I'd bought with money from my part-time job at the campus bookstore. Books I'd purchased for pleasure, not school. The few pieces of jewelry I'd inherited from my birth grandmother before she passed away when I was 6. I left behind the expensive laptop Daniel had bought me for graduation, the designer clothes Camille insisted on purchasing to help me fit in at college, the family photos that now looked like elaborate lies. These things had strings attached, invisible threads that bound me to their version of who I should be. As I packed, I thought about all the signs I'd missed, all the moments when I'd chosen to see love where there was only obligation. The way they introduced me to new people as our Beatrix, with that slight emphasis that marked me as different. The way family decisions were made around the kitchen table while I was conveniently upstairs doing homework. The way my achievements were celebrated politely, while Zephyr's were broadcasted to anyone who would listen. The house felt like a museum, now, full of artifacts from a life I'd never really lived. I was 22 years old, and I was finally seeing clearly for the first time. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Now standing at the bus stop with everything I truly owned in a single bag, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not sadness, not anger, but a strange kind of relief. Like I'd been holding my breath for 15 years, and could finally exhale. The bus arrived with a wheeze of hydraulic brakes, and I climbed aboard, fishing quarters from my pocket for the fare. Through the scratched windows, I watched Maple Grove Avenue disappear behind me, taking with it the last illusions of the family I'd never really had. My phone buzzed once more, another text from Camille. "Beatrix, please call me, we can work this out." But some things, I realized, couldn't be worked out. Some things had been broken from the very beginning, held together only by wishful thinking, and the desperate need to belong somewhere, anywhere. The bus rumbled toward downtown, toward the extended stay hotel and whatever came after. I didn't know what my future looked like, but for the first time in years, I knew it would be honest. The Oakwood Extended Stay Hotel wasn't exactly the Ritz, but it was mine in a way that 847 Maple Grove Avenue had never been. Room 204 came with a kitchenette, a fold-out couch, and most importantly, a deadbolt that only I controlled. As I sat cross-legged on the scratchy carpet, unpacking my meager belongings, memories flooded back with startling clarity. It was amazing how much you could remember once you stopped trying to forget. I'd been 7 when the Sterling Wild family first brought me home from Sunnybrook Foster Care Center. 7 years old, clutching a teddy bear named Mr. Buttons and convinced that this time would be different. This time someone would want to keep me. Camille had been so warm that first day, kneeling down to my height in the foster center's lobby, her smile bright and reassuring. "Hi Beatrix, I'm Camille, and I'm so excited to meet you. Are you ready to come see your new room?" Even at 7, I'd learned to be cautious about words like new and your. But something in her eyes had seemed genuine, and when she took my hand, her fingers were soft and smelled like vanilla lotion. I wanted so badly to believe that this beautiful woman with the kind voice could love me the way I'd seen other mothers love their daughters. The house had seemed enormous then, all gleaming hardwood floors and family photos covering every surface. Camille showed me to what would become my bedroom, painted soft lavender with white furniture and curtains covered in dancing butterflies. There was even a bookshelf, empty but waiting to be filled. "What do you think, sweetie?" she'd asked, watching my face carefully. I'd been too overwhelmed to speak, so I just nodded and hugged Mr. Buttons tighter. It was the most beautiful room I'd ever seen, certainly nicer than any of the foster homes or the cramped apartment I'd shared with my birth mother before the social workers came. Daniel had been polite but distant, the way adults often were when they weren't sure how to talk to displaced kids. He'd shown me how to work the television remote, and promised to take me to get library card once I was settled. Zephyr, then 10 years old, had been curious but distracted, more interested in his video games than his new sister. Those first few months had been magical in the way that new beginnings always are when you're desperate for them to work. Camille took me shopping for school clothes, helped me practice writing my new last name, and even let me help her bake cookies for the school fundraiser. I threw myself into being the perfect daughter, the grateful adoptee who would prove worthy of their kindness. I should have noticed earlier that Zephyr never had to prove anything. The first crack appeared during my second Christmas with them. I'd been 8, still young enough to believe in Santa Claus and the possibility of unconditional love. On Christmas morning, I'd crept downstairs to find the living room transformed into a winter wonderland of wrapping paper and ribbon. Zephyr's gifts covered half the room, expensive electronics and sports equipment and clothes with designer labels still attached. My pile was smaller, more modest, but I'd been grateful for every item. A new winter coat, some books, a art set that I'd admired at the store weeks earlier. I'd thanked them profusely, hugging each present like it was made of gold. But later that day, while helping Camille clean up the wrapping paper, I'd overheard her on the phone with her sister. "Of course we got her things," Camille was saying, her voice carrying that slightly defensive tone I'd learned to recognize over the years. "We're not monsters, but you have to understand Linda, she's not like Zephyr. She doesn't have the same expectations. Different expectations." That phrase would haunt me for years, becoming the unspoken rule that governed every aspect of our family dynamic. In school, when Zephyr brought home straight A's, there were celebrations, dinner at his favorite restaurant, new video games, calls to grandparents, who would coo with pride. When I brought home straight A's, which I did consistently, there were polite nods and generic phrases like "we're proud of you, sweetie." My academic achievements went on the refrigerator for a week before being quietly replaced by Zephyr's latest soccer trophy or art project. By middle school, the pattern was so established that I'd stopped questioning it. Zephyr got expensive name-brand clothes, while I shopped in the clearance section of discount stores. Zephyr got driving lessons and his own car for his 16th birthday, while I learned to navigate the bus system. Zephyr's friends were always welcome in our home, filling our kitchen with laughter and teenage chaos, while my friends rarely made it past polite hellos at the front door. I told myself it was about money, that raising 2 teenagers was expensive and they had to prioritize. I told myself it was about biology, that of course they felt differently about their biological son. I told myself it was about personality, that Zephyr was just more outgoing, more naturally charismatic than I was. But deep down I knew it was about belonging. Zephyr belonged to them in a way that I never could, no matter how perfectly I behaved, or how grateful I appeared. The summer I turned 16, Camille and Daniel took Zephyr on a special trip to visit colleges on the East Coast. They'd planned it for months, researching schools and booking tours and hotels. I'd assumed I would go too, maybe not to the college tours, but at least along for the family trip. 2 weeks before they were supposed to leave, Camille sat me down in the kitchen with that careful expression she wore when she was about to deliver disappointing news gently. "Honey, we've arranged for you to stay with the Rodriguez family while we're gone. You remember Maria from church? She has a daughter your age." I'd stared at her, processing this information slowly. "I'm not going with you." "Well, sweetie, this trip is really focused on Zephyr's future, and we thought you'd be bored visiting college campuses. Plus, Maria's daughter Sophia could use a friend for the week." Another translation I'd become fluent in: "This is a real family trip, and you're not part of the real family." I'd smiled and nodded, telling them I understood, telling Maria Rodriguez how excited I was to spend the week with her family. But lying in Sophia's guest bedroom that week, listening to her real family laugh and argue and exist together in the kitchen downstairs, I felt the loneliness settle into my bones like winter cold. They brought me back a snow globe from Boston and a sweatshirt from Harvard, souvenirs that felt like consolation prizes for not being worth including in their memories. High school brought new variations on the same theme. Zephyr's soccer games drew crowds of extended family, grandparents and aunts and uncles who traveled hours to cheer him on. My debate team competitions were attended by Camille, if she wasn't busy, and never by Daniel, who seemed to regard my intellectual achievements as somehow less worthy of celebration than Zephyr's athletic ones. When I won the state championship for extemporaneous speaking my senior year, beating students from much larger schools, Camille gave me a hug, and told me she was proud. When Zephyr scored the winning goal in a regional tournament that same month, Daniel took a week off work to drive to every relative's house and personally deliver the news. College was supposed to be my escape, my chance to build something that belonged entirely to me. I'd earned a partial academic scholarship to Westfield University, supplementing it with student loans and a work-study job that kept me busy enough to have an excuse for not coming home every weekend like Zephyr did when he started college 2 years later. But even from 40 miles away, the patterns followed me. Care packages arrived irregularly, usually prompted by guilt rather than affection. Phone calls were brief and centered around practical matters rather than emotional connection. When I made Dean's List 3 semesters in a row, the news was received with polite congratulations. When Zephyr made starting lineup his freshman year, the entire extended family received text message updates with photos. I'd started dating someone my junior year, a sweet psychology major, named Alex, who asked thoughtful questions and listened to my answers with genuine interest. When I finally worked up the courage to bring Alex home for dinner, the evening was polite but strained, filled with the kind of surface-level conversation you have with acquaintances rather than family. Afterward, Camille had pulled me aside with that careful expression I knew so well. "Alex seems very nice, honey. But are you sure you're ready for something serious? You have your whole future ahead of you." When Zephyr brought home his girlfriend Belissa 2 months later, Camille had immediately started planning elaborate dinner parties and asking when they might get engaged. Different expectations, always different expectations. The most painful realization came during my senior year of college, when I overheard a conversation between Camille and her sister Linda during Thanksgiving dinner. I'd gone to the kitchen to refill the water pitcher, and heard them talking in low voices by the window. "She's turned out well," considering Linda was saying. "Oh yes, we're very pleased. She's been no trouble at all, really. Very self-sufficient. It must have been hard, taking her in when she was already so traumatized from her early experiences." Well, you know, we felt like we had something to offer. And it's been good for Zephyr too, having a sister. It's taught him about compassion and giving back. I'd stood frozen in the doorway, the water pitcher growing heavy in my hands. 15 years in their home, and I was still a charity project, a way for them to teach their real son about compassion. That night, I'd called Alex and cried for 2 hours, trying to explain feelings I'd never been able to articulate before. Alex had listened patiently, and then said something that changed my perspective forever. "Beatrix, you keep waiting for them to see you the way you want to be seen. But what if they're never going to? What if you're enough all by yourself, without their validation?" It was a revolutionary concept, the idea that I didn't need their approval to be worthy, that their inability to love me fully was their limitation, not my failing. But old habits die hard, and I'd continued playing the role of the grateful adoptee, showing up for holidays and family dinners, pretending that the casual cruelties were just misunderstandings, that underneath it all they really did consider me part of the family. Until yesterday when Camille's words stripped away the last of my illusions. We're busy with real kids right now. Real kids. As I sat in my hotel room, surrounded by everything I truly owned, I finally understood what Alex had been trying to tell me. I was enough all by myself. I had always been enough. It had just taken me 22 years to realize that their inability to see it said everything about them and nothing about me. 3 days into my stay at the Oakwood extended stay, I was starting to understand why they called it extended stay rather than temporary home. The thin walls, the perpetual smell of disinfectant mixed with other people's cooking, and the flickering fluorescent light in the bathroom were becoming oddly familiar. I'd fallen into a routine of sorts: instant coffee at dawn, long walks through downtown to avoid thinking too much, and evenings spent on my laptop, pretending to look for apartments while actually scrolling through social media like some kind of self-inflicted torture. That's how I stumbled across the photos. It was Thursday evening, and I was mindlessly checking Instagram when Zephyr's profile popped up in my suggested feed. I hadn't unfollowed him yet, hadn't gotten around to the digital purge that probably needed to happen eventually. His latest post was a carousel of images from the soccer tournament in Millbrook, the same tournament that had been more important than my birthday. The first photo showed him mid-kick, grass flying, his face a mask of athletic concentration. The second was a team celebration, arms raised in victory. But it was the third photo that made my stomach drop. It was a family shot taken at some restaurant, clearly after the game. Zephyr sat in the middle, still wearing his grass-stained uniform, his face glowing with post-victory adrenaline. Camille and Daniel flanked him, their arms around his shoulders, all three of them beaming at the camera. The caption read, "Nothing better than celebrating with the people who matter most. State championship, here we come." The people who matter most. I stared at that photo for a long time, studying their faces, their body language, the way they leaned into each other like magnets drawn to the same pole. This was what a real family looked like, I realized. This was the kind of spontaneous joy and unconditional pride I'd spent 15 years hoping they might someday feel for me. But what really broke something inside me was the timestamp. The photo had been posted Sunday evening, the day they were supposed to return home. The day they'd promised we could have a big celebration for my belated birthday. I scrolled through the comments, each one a little dagger to whatever was left of my hope. Such a beautiful family. You guys are goals. Zephyr is so lucky to have such supportive parents. Lucky. Yes, he was lucky. Lucky to be the kind of son who inspired restaurant celebrations and social media boasts. Lucky to matter most. My phone buzzed with a text notification. For a wild moment, I thought it might be them. Finally reaching out, finally remembering their promise. Instead, it was from Joanne Hayes, my coworker from the campus bookstore. "Hey girl, how was the family birthday celebration? Did they spoil you rotten?" I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How do you explain that your family forgot you existed the moment they drove out of the driveway? How do you admit that you'd been naive enough to believe their empty promises about celebrating later? Instead of answering Joanne, I found myself typing a comment on Zephyr's post before I could stop myself. "Looks like an amazing celebration, so glad you got to spend it with the people who matter most." I hit send before I could reconsider, then immediately regretted it. It was passive-aggressive and petty, exactly the kind of behavior that would give them ammunition to paint me as the unreasonable one, the ungrateful adoptee, who couldn't be satisfied no matter how much they gave her. But I was past caring about being reasonable. Within minutes my phone rang. Camille's contact photo filled the screen, a picture from last Christmas where she was wearing the red sweater I'd bought her with my bookstore employee discount. I let it go to voicemail. She called again immediately. Then again. Finally I answered. "Beatrix honey, what was that comment supposed to mean?" Her voice had that tightly controlled quality it took on when she was trying very hard not to sound angry. "I don't know what you mean," I said, though we both knew I was lying. "Don't play games with me, you know exactly what I mean." That comment on Zephyr's photo was completely inappropriate. Inappropriate. There was that word again, the one she used whenever I dared to express any emotion that didn't fit their carefully constructed narrative of grateful, well-adjusted adoptee. "I was just congratulating him on his win," I said evenly. "Isn't that what families do? You know this isn't about the game, Beatrix. This is about your birthday, isn't it? You're still upset about that." Still upset. As if my hurt had an expiration date, as if I should have gotten over being called not a real kid by now. "Should I not be upset, Camille?" I asked, using her first name deliberately. "Should I just pretend you didn't say what you said?" There was a long pause. I could hear voices in the background, probably Daniel and Zephyr, and I realized they were all still together somewhere, probably at another celebratory dinner that I wasn't invited to. I think we need to have this conversation in person, she said finally. When are you coming home?
Home.
The word felt foreign now, like something from a language I used to speak but had forgotten. I'm not, I said simply. What do you mean you're not? Beatrix, where are you staying? I'm staying at a hotel. I moved out. The silence that followed was so complete I thought the call had dropped. When Camille spoke again, her voice was higher, strained. You moved out, what are you talking about? You can't just move out, you're still in college, where are you going to get money for rent? This is ridiculous. And there it was, the real concern. Not that I was hurt, not that they'd damaged our relationship possibly beyond repair, but how I was going to manage financially without them. Because in their minds, that's all they'd ever been to me. A source of financial support, a roof over my head, the bare minimum legal requirements of guardianship. I'll figure it out, I said. I always do. Beatrix, you're being dramatic. One little comment and you're throwing away 15 years. We raised you, we clothed you, we put you through college. One little comment. I interrupted, feeling 15 years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. Camille, you called me not a real kid. After 15 years in your home, you still see me as something less than your actual family. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I was stressed I misspoke. Did you? Because looking at Zephyr's Instagram, it seems pretty clear who the real family is. Restaurant celebrations, proud parents, social media posts about the people who matter most. Where exactly do I fit in that picture? Another long pause. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from defensive to manipulative, the voice she used when she wanted to make me feel guilty for having feelings. Honey, you're clearly going through something right now. Maybe we should talk to someone, a counselor or therapist. This kind of reaction isn't normal. Wasn't normal. There was the implication that had followed me my entire life, that my reactions, my emotions, my very existence was somehow abnormal, something to be managed and corrected rather than understood. You're right, I said, surprising her. My reaction isn't normal. A normal person would have left years ago. A normal person wouldn't have spent 15 years begging for scraps of affection from people who saw her as a charity project. That's not fair, Beatrix. We've given you everything. You've given me everything except the one thing I actually wanted. You've given me everything except belonging. Everything except mattering. I heard her take a shaky breath. Of course you matter. You're part of this family. Am I? Because when you introduced me to people, it was always our Beatrixes with that little emphasis that made sure everyone knew I was different. When you planned family trips, I was an afterthought or an inconvenience. When I achieved something, it was met with polite pride. When Zephyr achieved something, it was cause for celebration. You're twisting things. I'm seeing things clearly for the first time in my life. I was crying now, but my voice remained steady. I spent 15 years trying to earn something that was never available to me. I spent 15 years believing that if I was just grateful enough, perfect enough, quiet enough, you might love me the way you love him. We do love you. No, I said firmly. You love the idea of yourselves as people who took in a troubled girl and gave her a good life. You love the story you get to tell about your generosity. But you don't love me, Beatrix. You don't even know me. The background voices were getting louder now. I could hear Daniel asking what was wrong, could hear Camille trying to cover the phone with her hand. Look, she said, her voice taking on that brisk, problem-solving tone she used for difficult situations. You're clearly emotional right now, and that's understandable. Why don't you come home? We'll order pizza, and we can work all of this out like a family. Like a family. Even now, even after everything, she was still offering me the consolation prize version of love. Pizza and damage control instead of genuine understanding or accountability. I don't want pizza, I said quietly. I want parents who remember my birthday without being reminded. I want parents who celebrate my achievements with the same enthusiasm they show for their biological son. I want parents who introduce me as their daughter without qualifiers. I want to matter, not just be managed. Beatrix, you're being unreasonable. Am I? Or am I finally being honest about what this relationship actually is? She was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe finally she might try to understand. Instead, she sighed in that long-suffering way that made it clear she saw this conversation as an inconvenience rather than a revelation. Fine, if you want to throw away everything we've built together over a misunderstanding, that's your choice. But don't expect us to keep supporting someone who won't even live under our roof. There it was, the ultimatum I'd been waiting for my entire life. Come back and pretend nothing happened, or lose the only family I'd ever known. I understand, I said. Thank you for making it clear where I stand. Beatrix, don't be dramatic, just come home. But I'd already hung up. I sat in the silence of room 204, my phone dark in my hands, feeling something shift inside me like tectonic plates finding new positions after an earthquake. For 15 years, I'd been afraid of this moment, terrified of the day when they might stop pretending I belonged. But now that it was here, I felt something unexpected. Relief. I wasn't throwing away 15 years of family. I was finally admitting that the family I'd been clinging to had never really existed in the first place. The morning after Camille's ultimatum, I woke up in room 204, with a clarity I'd never experienced before. The weak sunlight filtering through the hotel's thin curtains illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the familiar weight of anxiety pressing down on my chest. Instead, I felt something that took me a moment to recognize: freedom. I made myself instant coffee with the little machine provided by the hotel, and sat cross-legged on the scratchy carpet, my laptop balanced on my knees. But instead of scrolling aimlessly through apartment listings I couldn't afford, I found myself opening a blank document and typing words that had been building inside me for years. My name is Beatrix Finch, and I want to tell you about the difference between being housed and being home. The words flowed out of me like water through a broken dam, 15 years of carefully suppressed observations finally finding their voice. I wrote about the subtle ways exclusion manifests in families, about the exhausting performance of gratitude, about the specific loneliness that comes from being simultaneously included and isolated. I wrote until my fingers cramped, and my coffee grew cold, purging myself of every memory I'd been carrying like stones in my pockets. When I finally stopped, I had written nearly 4,000 words. It wasn't polished or perfect, but it was honest in a way I'd never been before, not even with myself. I saved the document and closed my laptop, feeling lighter than I had in years. My phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout my writing session. Missed calls from Camille, text messages from Daniel, even one from Zephyr, that simply read "Mom says you moved out." But I ignored them all. I was done responding to their schedule, done being available whenever they decided they needed to manage the situation. Instead, I got dressed and walked to the coffee shop 3 blocks from the hotel, a little place called Grindstone, that served actual espresso and had free Wi-Fi that was faster than the hotel's connection. The barista, a girl about my age with intricate braids and paint-stained fingers, smiled when I ordered. "You're new," she said, not accusingly but with the kind of casual observational skill that suggested she noticed regular customers. "I'm Leora, Beatrix. And yes, very new. Cool name.
Oh,
Like the one who killed all those people in Shakespeare. Different spelling but close enough," I said, surprised to find myself smiling. When was the last time someone had commented on my name without immediately asking about my real parents or my adoption story? Even cooler, I always thought that Beatrice was way more interesting than the boring nice girls in most plays. I found a corner table and reopened my laptop, but instead of continuing my autobiographical purge, I found myself researching something else entirely: my legal rights as an adult adoptee. It was something I'd never thought to investigate before, but Camille's threat about cutting off financial support had made me realize how little I actually knew about my own situation. What I discovered was both liberating and terrifying. At 22, I was completely legally independent. They had no obligation to support me, but conversely, I had no obligation to maintain contact with them. The adoption papers I'd never thought to request were mine to obtain if I wanted them. Any money they'd spent on my upbringing was exactly that: toss, money they'd chosen to spend, not a debt I owed. More importantly, I learned that my original birth certificate, which had been sealed when the adoption was finalized, could potentially be unsealed now that I was an adult. For 15 years, I'd known only fragments of my early life, the carefully sanitized version that social workers and adoptive parents shared. Mother struggling with addiction, father unknown, removed from home at age 6 due to neglect. But there might be more to the story. There might be relatives I didn't know about, family medical history that could be relevant, even just a fuller understanding of where I came from before I landed in the Sterling Wild household. I spent the rest of the morning filling out forms and researching agencies, methodically building a picture of my options. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on what I wanted rather than what would make other people comfortable. Around noon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Local area code though, so I answered. Is this Beatrix Finch? The voice was professional, female, vaguely familiar. Yes, speaking. This is Dr. Sarah Chen from the University Counseling Center. Camille Sterling called our office this morning requesting information about your mental health services. She seemed very concerned about you. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar flush of embarrassment that came whenever Camille involved other people in our family drama. Of course she'd called the counseling center. Of course she'd painted me as mentally unstable rather than simply tired of being treated poorly. What kind of information was she requesting? I asked. Well, she wanted to know if you'd been seeing anyone, if you'd been prescribed any medications, if we'd noticed any concerning behavior. I told her that even if you were a client, which I can neither confirm nor deny, we couldn't share that information without your explicit written consent. Thank you for that. She also suggested that you might be having some kind of breakdown, and asked if someone could perform a wellness check. I wanted to call you directly before involving any outside agencies. A wellness check. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. Paint me as mentally unstable, suggest I was a danger to myself, get professionals involved who might force me back into their control. It was exactly the kind of strategic thinking Camille excelled at, the way she could twist any situation to make herself the reasonable party and me the problem that needed to be solved. I appreciate you calling me directly, I said. I'm not having a breakdown, and I don't need a wellness check. I moved out of my adoptive family's home because I finally realized I was never going to be treated as an equal member of the family. It wasn't a mental health crisis, it was a moment of clarity. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. Would you be interested in scheduling an appointment? Not because I think you need intervention, but because major life transitions can be challenging even when they're positive choices. The offer was tempting, and her tone was completely different from the concerned authority figure voice I'd been expecting. This was someone offering support rather than management. Maybe, I said, can I think about it and call you back? Of course. And Beatrix, for what it's worth, from what I've observed in my years doing this work, the young adults who make thoughtful, independent decisions about their living situations tend to be the ones who are doing just fine. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone, processing the implications of Camille's call. She wasn't just trying to get me to come back. She was actively working to undermine my credibility, to create a narrative where I was unstable, and she was the concerned parent trying to help. It was a level of calculated cruelty that I'd never imagined her capable of, but it also crystallized something important for me. This wasn't a temporary fight that would blow over with time and apologies. This was a fundamental incompatibility that had been masked for years by my willingness to accept less than I deserved. I opened a new browser tab and started researching apartments in my price range, but this time with a different mindset. Instead of looking for the cheapest possible option, I searched for places that felt like homes rather than just shelters. Small studios and converted houses, apartments in neighborhoods with coffee shops and bookstores, spaces where I could build something that belonged entirely to me. By late afternoon, I'd scheduled 3 apartment viewings for the next day, and filled out preliminary applications for 2 part-time jobs that would allow me to maintain my class schedule while supporting myself. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be honest. My phone buzzed with another text from Zephyr. Can you please just call Mom back? She's freaking out, and it's making everything weird at home. I stared at the message, feeling a familiar tug of guilt. Poor Zephyr, caught in the middle of adult drama that he hadn't created. Part of me wanted to call him back, to explain my side, to try to maintain the one relationship in that family that had felt somewhat genuine. But then I realized something important. Zephyr's concern wasn't really about me. It was about restoring the comfortable status quo that made his life easier. He didn't want me to be happy. He wanted things to go back to normal so his mother would stop being upset and his home would stop feeling tense. I typed back a simple response. I'm fine, Zephyr. This isn't about you. Then I turned off my phone entirely. That evening, I walked to a nearby bookstore and bought a journal, something I hadn't kept since middle school when writing down my feelings had seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford. But now, sitting in the bookstore cafe with my new notebook open in front of me, I realized that documenting this transition wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. I started with a simple list, things I want in my new life. A place where I don't have to earn my right to exist. Friends who choose me because they enjoy my company, not because they feel sorry for me. The ability to celebrate my own achievements without downplaying them. Space to be imperfect without it being seen as proof that I'm fundamentally flawed. The freedom to have bad days without being told I'm being ungrateful. A family I choose, rather than one that chose me out of obligation. As I wrote, I realized that most of these things weren't actually about having more mirths. They were about no longer accepting less. I'd spent so many years focused on what I lacked that I'd never considered what I deserved. The barista from that morning, Leora, stopped by my table on her way out. "Good book?" she asked, nodding at my journal. "Good life choices," I said, surprising myself with my honesty. She grinned. "Those are the best kind of books to write." After she left, I sat in the slowly emptying bookstore, feeling something I'd never experienced before: excitement about my future. Not anxiety about how I would manage or guilt about who I might be disappointing, but genuine anticipation for what I might build. For the first time in my life, I was writing my own story, and it was going to be a good one. The apartment viewing was scheduled for 10 a.m., but I arrived 15 minutes early, standing on the sidewalk outside 423 Birchwood Lane, and trying to calm my racing heart. The building was a converted Victorian house painted sage green with white trim. Nothing fancy but charming in the way that suggested people lived there rather than just existed there. A small garden bordered the front walkway, and I could see lace curtains in several windows, the kind of personal touches that made a place feel like home. I'd spent the previous evening calculating and recalculating my budget, factoring in my work-study income, the small savings account I'd been building since high school, and the student loan refund I could expect next semester. It was going to be tighter than anything I'd ever managed before, but it was possible. More importantly, it was mine. The landlord, a woman in her 50s named Mrs. Patterson, met me at the front door with a warm smile and keys that jingled musically as she led me inside. "The studio is on the second floor," she explained as we climbed the narrow staircase. "It's small, but it gets wonderful light, and the previous tenant left it in excellent condition." She wasn't exaggerating about the light. The moment she opened the door, sunshine poured through two large windows that faced east, illuminating hardwood floors that creaked pleasantly under our feet. The space was tiny, maybe 400 square feet total, but it was clean and warm and completely, utterly empty of other people's expectations. "The kitchenette is here," Mrs. Patterson said, gesturing to a corner that held a small refrigerator, a two-burner stove, and enough cabinet space for someone who wasn't planning to do much elaborate cooking. "And the bathroom is through that door. The closet is surprisingly spacious for a place this size." I walked to the windows and looked out at the tree-lined street below. I could see the coffee shop where I'd met Leora, a small grocery store, and what looked like a used bookstore across the street. It was exactly the kind of neighborhood I'd always imagined myself living in someday, back when someday felt like a distant fantasy. "I'll take it," I said, the words coming out before I'd fully decided to say them. Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Don't you want to know about the lease terms?" "The deposit? Yes, of course. I'm sorry, it feels right." She spent the next 20 minutes explaining practical details: first month's rent plus security deposit, utilities included except for internet, lease renewable every 6 months with 60 days notice. The numbers made my stomach tighten with anxiety, but they were manageable. Just barely, but manageable. "I do want to be upfront about one thing," Mrs. Patterson said as we finished the paperwork. "I don't typically rent to college students. Too many parties, too much drama with parents calling to check up. But you seem different." "I am different," I said, signing my name with a flourish that felt like a declaration of independence. "My parents won't be calling." By noon I was officially a tenant at 423 Birchwood Lane, Unit 2B. The keys felt impossibly heavy in my palm, weighted with responsibility and possibility in equal measure. I stood alone in my empty apartment, listening to the sounds of the building, footsteps upstairs, a television murmuring somewhere nearby, the distant hum of traffic, and felt something I'd never experienced before: complete ownership of my space. My phone had been buzzing intermittently all morning, but I'd been ignoring it in favor of focusing on practical matters. Now, sitting cross-legged on my new hardwood floor, I finally looked at the messages. 7 missed calls from Camille. 3 from Daniel, 2 from Zephyr. And a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Linda, Camille's sister. She asked me to reach out. Please call home. Everyone is worried. Everyone is worried." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Where had this worry been for the past 15 years? Where had it been on the birthdays they forgot, the achievements they minimized, the countless moments when I could have used someone to actually see me? Instead of calling any of them back, I opened the document I'd started writing the day before and began typing again. There's a difference between being worried about someone and being worried about your own convenience. For 15 years, I made their lives easier by never demanding too much attention, never expecting equal treatment, never questioning why love in their household was distributed so unequally. Now that I've stopped making things easy for them, suddenly everyone is worried. I wrote for an hour, documenting not just the big moments of rejection but the thousands of small ones that had shaped my understanding of my place in their world. The way Daniel never asked about my day, but could recite Zephyr's class schedule from memory. The way Camille bought generic shampoo for me but name brand for Zephyr. The way family photos were arranged on the mantle with Zephyr in the center and me slightly off to the side, as if I were a friend who happened to be visiting rather than a daughter who lived there. When I finished writing, I did something I'd never done before. I posted it. Not on my barely used Facebook account that was connected to people from high school who didn't really know me, but on a blog platform where I could control who saw it and when. I titled the post, "The Invisible Daughter," and hit publish before I could second-guess myself. Within an hour, I had 3 comments from strangers who'd found the post through tags I'd included about adoption and family dynamics. Each comment was thoughtful, supportive, and most importantly, understanding. These were people who had recognized themselves in my story, who had lived through similar experiences of being perpetually on the outside of families that had taken them in. "Thank you for putting words to something I've felt my whole life, but never knew how to explain," wrote someone with the username FreeTheBirds23. "Reading this made me feel less alone. I hope writing it made you feel less alone too," commented Real Talk Ruth. The third comment was longer, from someone called Adoptee Advocate. "Your story resonates with thousands of us who were raised by people who saw adoption as charity work rather than family building. You're not ungrateful for wanting to be treated as an equal. You're not dramatic for expecting the same love and attention given to biological offspring. And you're certainly not wrong for choosing yourself when no one else will." I sat staring at my laptop screen, overwhelmed by the validation from complete strangers who understood my experience better than the people who had raised me. For 15 years, I'd been told that my perceptions were wrong, that I was too sensitive, that I should be grateful for what I had instead of wanting more. But these comments confirmed what I'd begun to suspect: my experience wasn't unusual, and my responses weren't unreasonable. My phone rang again. Camille, of course. This time I answered. "Beatrix, thank God. I've been calling all day. Where are you? Daniel and I want to come get you and bring you home." "I'm in my apartment," I said calmly. "You're what? You don't have an apartment. You're being ridiculous. I signed a lease this morning, 423 Birchwood Lane, Unit 2B. It's small, but it's mine." The silence that followed was so complete I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice had taken on that dangerously controlled quality that meant she was furious but trying to hide it. "You signed a lease? With what money? How are you planning to pay for rent and utilities and groceries? You can't just make impulsive decisions like this. Beatrix, you're still a student." "I'm a student with a job and financial aid, and apparently enough credit to qualify for an apartment. I'm not asking you to pay for anything. This is insane. You're throwing away your entire future because you got your feelings hurt over one comment. Do you understand how selfish this is? How much this is hurting Zephyr? He doesn't understand why his sister just disappeared. His sister, even now, even in her attempts at emotional manipulation, she couldn't resist the subtle reminders of who really belonged and who didn't." "Zephyr will be fine," I said. "He has parents who love him unconditionally, support his dreams and celebrate his existence. He doesn't need me to make his life complete." "We love you too, Beatrix. You know that, do you? Because I've been thinking about that a lot lately, trying to figure out what your version of love actually looks like, and I think you love the idea of me. You love the story about the generous family who took in a troubled girl and gave her opportunities. You love feeling like good people who did the right thing. But I don't think you love me, Beatrix, the actual person with thoughts and feelings and needs that don't always align with what's convenient for you." "That's not true, and it's hurtful for you to say that. It's hurtful for you to hear it," I corrected. "But that doesn't make it untrue." Another long silence. I could hear her breathing, could picture her sitting in the kitchen where she'd delivered her real kids comment just days earlier, struggling to find an angle that would make me feel guilty enough to come back. "Fine," she said finally, her voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. "If you want to throw away 15 years of family for the sake of your wounded pride, that's your choice. But don't expect us to keep treating you like family when you don't want to be part of this family." I never said I didn't want to be part of the family, I said quietly. I said I wanted to be an actual part of the family, not just someone you kept around to make yourselves feel generous. "You're twisting everything around. We gave you everything we gave Zephyr." "No, Camille, you gave me everything you thought an adoptee should be grateful for. You gave Zephyr everything a beloved son deserves, and you never seemed to notice the difference." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking slightly as I set the phone aside. But underneath the adrenaline, underneath the fear of being completely alone for the first time in my adult life, I felt something solid and unshakable. Certainty. I was done begging for crumbs of affection from people who saw my basic human needs as unreasonable demands. I was done performing gratitude for treatment that was at best adequate and at worst deliberately cruel. I was 22 years old, and I was finally learning that I deserved better than being someone's good deed. That evening, I walked to the grocery store and bought supplies for my new life: coffee, pasta, eggs, bread, and a single cupcake with pink frosting from the bakery section. Back in my apartment, I lit a candle I'd found in the clearance section, stuck it in the cupcake and sang happy birthday to myself. It wasn't the family celebration I'd dreamed of, but it was honest, and for the first time in years, honest felt like enough. The first week in my new apartment passed in a blissful bubble of independence. I woke up when my body wanted to wake up, not when someone else's schedule demanded it. I ate cereal for dinner and soup for breakfast, if that's what appealed to me. I played music without worrying about disturbing anyone, left books open on surfaces without someone moving them to tidy up, and most importantly, I went entire days without feeling like I needed to justify my existence to anyone. But the bubble burst on Friday morning when Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door, her usually warm expression replaced by something that looked like concern mixed with annoyance. "Beatrix, honey, I'm sorry to bother you so early, but I need to talk to you about something." I invited her in, noting how she glanced around my sparsely furnished studio with the kind of assessment that suggested she was evaluating my stability as a tenant. "I got a very strange call yesterday," she began, settling into the one chair I'd managed to buy secondhand. "From a woman claiming to be your mother. She wanted to know about your lease agreement, asked about your employment verification, even questioned whether you'd provided accurate references." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing, of course. I don't discuss my tenants' private information with anyone, family or otherwise. But she was quite persistent. She suggested that you might be having some kind of mental health crisis, and that the lease should be voided for your own protection." The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Camille had gone from trying to guilt me into coming home to actively trying to sabotage my independence. She was attempting to pull the rug out from under my new life before I'd even had a chance to properly build it. "I'm not having a mental health crisis," I said, hearing how defensive I sounded. "I'm just an adult who decided to move out of a situation that wasn't healthy for me." Mrs. Patterson studied my face carefully. "That's what I figured, honestly. In my experience, the young people who are actually having breakdowns don't handle logistics like security deposits and utility transfers with the kind of efficiency you showed. But I wanted you to know that she called, in case she tries other approaches." Other approaches. The phrase sent a chill through me as I realized that Camille wasn't going to simply accept my decision and move on. She was going to escalate. I was right. By noon I'd received calls from 3 different people: my academic advisor Dr. Williams, asking if I needed to discuss family challenges that might be affecting my coursework; the financial aid office inquiring about changes to my dependency status; and most unsettling, someone from the university's Dean of Students office, requesting a meeting to discuss concerns raised by family members about student welfare. Each call followed the same pattern. Camille had contacted them with carefully worded concerns about my mental state, my living situation, and my ability to make sound decisions. She'd painted herself as the worried mother trying to help a troubled daughter, while painting me as unstable and potentially self-destructive. It was character assassination disguised as maternal concern, and it was working. I spent the afternoon making defensive phone calls, assuring various officials that I was fine, that my decisions were well considered, that I didn't need intervention. With each conversation, I felt my hard-won independence slipping away, replaced by the familiar feeling of being managed and evaluated by people who thought they knew what was best for me. The worst call came around 4 p.m., from someone I hadn't expected. "Beatrix, this is your Aunt Linda, Camille's sister, the one who'd sent the text asking me to call home." I'd always liked Linda, had thought she was different from Camille in important ways. She was quieter, more thoughtful, and had always seemed to actually listen when I talked rather than just waiting for her turn to speak. "Hi, Aunt Linda. Honey, your mother is beside herself with worry. She told me you've moved out, that you won't return her calls, that you're isolating yourself and making impulsive decisions." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar tug of guilt that came whenever extended family got involved. These were people who'd known me since I was 7, who'd attended birthday parties and graduation ceremonies, who'd watched me grow up in the Sterling Wilde household. Their concern felt more genuine than Camille's manipulation, which made it harder to dismiss. "I'm not isolating myself," I said carefully. "I moved into my own apartment. I'm still going to classes, still working, still living my life. I just decided I needed some space from a family dynamic that wasn't healthy for me." "But sweetheart, they love you so much. I know Camille can be intense sometimes, but she's always been so proud of you." "They both have. Proud of me." I wanted to ask Linda about the specifics of that pride. When had Camille expressed it? What had she said? Because in 15 years of family gatherings, I couldn't recall a single instance of Camille bragging about my achievements the way she constantly bragged about Zephyr's. "Aunt Linda, can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey. When you think about my relationship with Camille and Daniel, does it seem equal to Zephyr's relationship with them? Do you think they treat us the same way?" There was a long pause, longer than I'd expected. When Linda spoke again, her voice was more careful, more measured. "They have different relationships with both of you, yes, but that's normal in families. Parents relate to each of their children differently." "That's not what I asked." Another pause. "Beatrix, I think you might be overthinking things. You've always been more sensitive than Zephyr, more prone to taking things personally." More sensitive. There it was again, the implication that my perceptions were the problem rather than the reality I'd been living. Even Linda, who I'd thought might understand, was falling back on the familiar narrative that painted me as overly emotional rather than legitimately hurt. "Maybe I am sensitive," I said, "but that doesn't make my observations wrong." After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment feeling more alone than I had since leaving Maple Grove Avenue. It was one thing to stand up to Camille and Daniel, who had never truly accepted me anyway. It was another thing entirely to realize that even the extended family members I'd trusted saw me through the same distorted lens. My phone buzzed with a text from Zephyr. "Can you please just talk to Mom? She's been crying all day, and Dad is furious. This is affecting everyone." I stared at the message, feeling a familiar surge of guilt. Poor Zephyr, living in a house full of tension because of choices I'd made. Part of me wanted to call Camille, to apologize, to smooth things over and restore the peace. But then I remembered something Dr. Chen had said during the brief phone conversation we'd had earlier that week. When you start living authentically, the people around you who were comfortable with your inauthenticity will often pressure you to go back to being who they needed you to be, rather than who you actually are. I typed back to Zephyr. "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, but I can't go back to pretending everything is fine when it isn't." His response came quickly. "Nothing was wrong before you made it wrong. We were happy. You were happy." I thought but didn't type. "You were happy, because I was invisible enough not to disturb your perfect family dynamic." Instead I wrote, "I wasn't happy, Zephyr, and my happiness matters too." He didn't respond to that. That evening, as I was heating up leftover pasta and trying to focus on my homework, my phone rang with yet another unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, exhausted from a day of defensive conversations, but something made me pick up. "Is this Beatrix Finch?" The voice was official, professional. "Yes, this is Officer Martinez, with the University Police. We received a request for a wellness check from a family member who expressed concerns about your mental health and living situation." My heart started pounding. A wellness check. Camille had actually called the police on me, had escalated her manipulation campaign to the point where law enforcement was involved. "I'm fine," I said, hearing how shaky my voice sounded. "I'm not in any danger. I'm not a threat to myself or anyone else. I just moved into my own apartment." Ma'am, we're required to conduct these checks in person when they're requested by immediate family members. Would you prefer that we come to you, or would you like to meet us somewhere public? I felt trapped, cornered by Camille's increasingly desperate attempts to force me back under her control. If I refused to meet with them, it would look like I had something to hide. If I agreed, I was legitimizing her narrative that I needed to be checked on by authorities. I'll meet you, I said finally. There's a coffee shop called Grindstone 3 blocks from my apartment. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Officer Martinez and her partner Officer Kim, feeling like a criminal even though I'd done nothing wrong. They were kind but thorough, asking about my living situation, my support system, my mental health history, my plans for the future. Your mother seems very concerned, Officer Martinez said gently. She mentioned that you've been acting erratically, that you moved out without warning, that you're not responding to family attempts to help. My adoptive mother, I corrected, is concerned because I stopped accepting treatment that made me unhappy. She's not worried about my safety or my mental health. She's worried about losing control. Officer Kim looked up from her notes. Can you elaborate on that? So I did. I told them about 15 years of subtle exclusion, about birthday forgotten in favor of soccer tournaments, about being called not a real kid, and then expected to come home for pizza like nothing had happened. I told them about Camille's attempts to sabotage my lease, her calls to university officials, her systematic campaign to paint me as unstable rather than simply independent. The officers listened without judgment, taking notes and asking clarifying questions that suggested they'd seen similar situations before. Miss Finch, Officer Martinez said finally, based on our conversation, you seem to be managing a difficult family situation in a thoughtful, responsible way. We'll file our report indicating that no intervention is needed. What will you tell my adoptive mother? We'll tell her that we conducted the requested wellness check and found no cause for concern. As they prepared to leave, Officer Kim handed me a card. If the harassment continues, if they try to interfere with your housing or employment or education, that becomes a different matter. You have rights as an adult, regardless of family relationships. After they left, I sat alone in Grindstone, nursing a coffee that had gone cold while I talked to the police. The barista, Leora, came over as she was cleaning up for the night. You okay? She asked. You look like you've had a rough day. Family stuff, I said, not wanting to get into details with someone who was basically a stranger. The chosen kind or the biological kind? I looked up, surprised by the question. What do you mean? I mean, family can be the people who raised you, or it can be the people who actually see you and love you for who you are. Sometimes those are the same people, sometimes they're not. Definitely not the same people, I said. She smiled. Then you're probably in the process of finding your real family. That's scary but exciting. After she left, I sat in the empty coffee shop until the owner gently told me they were closing. Walking back to my apartment, I realized that Camille's escalation campaign had backfired in a way she hadn't intended. Every desperate attempt to drag me back, every manipulation tactic, every call to authority figures was proving my point more effectively than I ever could have on my own. She wasn't acting like someone who missed me or wanted what was best for me. She was acting like someone who couldn't tolerate losing control over a situation she'd always been able to manage. For 15 years, I doubted my own perceptions, wondering if I was too sensitive or too demanding. But watching her reaction to my independence was like looking at our entire relationship through a clarity filter. She didn't love me, she loved having power over me. And now that I'd taken that power away, she was showing her true colors. It was painful to see, but it was also liberating. I wasn't losing a loving family, I was escaping a controlling situation that had been masquerading as love for far too long. 3 weeks after the police wellness check incident, I made a decision that would change everything forever. I was sitting in my apartment on a quiet Sunday morning, reading comments on my blog post, The Invisible Daughter, when I realized something powerful: my story wasn't just mine anymore. Dozens of people had found it, shared it, and most importantly, recognized themselves in it. The comments section had become a support group of sorts, filled with adoptees, stepchildren, and foster kids who had lived through similar experiences of conditional love and strategic exclusion. People were sharing their own stories, offering advice, and most significantly, validating experiences that families like mine preferred to keep hidden behind closed doors. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth. wrote someone called Second Choice. My stepmother used to introduce me as David's daughters while introducing her biological son as our son. I thought I was imagining the difference until I read your post. Another comment from Adopted and Thriving read, I'm 35 now and just went no contact with my adoptive family last year. Reading this made me wish I'd been brave enough to leave at 22 like you did. You're inspiring people. That's when I decided to do something I'd never considered before. I created a video. Using my laptop's camera and natural light from my apartment windows, I recorded myself reading The Invisible Daughter aloud, adding context and details that hadn't fit in the written version. I talked about the birthday dinner where I sat alone, about Camille's real kids comment, about the systematic campaign to undermine my independence after I moved out. But more importantly, I talked about what I'd learned in the weeks since leaving Maple Grove Avenue. I spent 15 years believing that love was something I had to earn through perfect behavior and endless gratitude, I said to the camera. I thought that if I just tried harder, needed less, and caused fewer problems, they might eventually see me as worthy of the same affection they gave their biological son. But love isn't something you earn. Love is something you deserve, simply by existing. I uploaded the video to multiple platforms with the title The Difference Between Being Housed and Being Home, using tags that would help other adoptees and stepchildren find it. Then I shared the link in several online support groups for people with complicated family dynamics. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours, the video had been viewed over 10,000 times. People were commenting, sharing their own experiences, and most importantly, talking about issues that families like mine preferred to keep private. The conversation was spreading to platforms I hadn't even posted on, shared by viewers who felt seen and heard for the first time. But the real impact became clear when my phone started ringing with calls from local news outlets. We'd like to interview you about family dynamics and adoption, said a producer from Channel 7 News. Your story is resonating with a lot of people in our community. I agreed to the interview, and when it aired the following week, something extraordinary happened. The story went regional, then national. Not because it was sensational, but because it was common. Thousands of people recognized their own experiences and mine, and for the first time, these stories were being discussed openly rather than whispered about in therapy offices and support groups. The segment included my video clips alongside interviews with family therapists who confirmed what I'd been saying, that emotional neglect in adoptive and blended families was far more common than most people realized, and that children in these situations often spent years doubting their own perceptions. More importantly, the news coverage included comments from viewers who had witnessed similar dynamics in their own extended families but had never known how to address them. That's when I knew Camille would see it. The call came at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday from Daniel's number this time. Do you have any idea what you've done? His voice was tight with rage. Half the people in town have seen that news story. Camille can barely show her face at work. You've humiliated us. I told the truth, I said calmly. If that's humiliating, maybe you should think about why. You made us look like monsters. We gave you everything, and you repaid us by destroying our reputation in the community. You gave me housing, food and education, I corrected. You never gave me what Zephyr got, which was unconditional love and genuine pride in who I am, rather than gratitude for what you'd done for me. The conversation escalated from there, with Daniel threatening legal action for defamation and Camille grabbing the phone to sob about how I was destroying the family. But their words had lost their power to hurt me, because I was no longer alone in this experience. The next morning, I woke up to hundreds of new messages from people thanking me for speaking truth about family dynamics that had been hidden for too long. My story had become bigger than just my story. It had become a catalyst for conversations that needed to happen. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly visible. 6 months after the news story aired, I was sitting in my favorite corner of Grindstone Coffee, laptop open, responding to emails from people around the country who had reached out after seeing my interview. The coffee shop had become my unofficial office, a place where Leora would bring me free refills and Mrs. Patterson would stop by to check on her favorite tenant. My life looked completely different now, and not just because I was living independently. I'd found my footing in ways I'd never imagined possible at 22. The part-time job at the campus bookstore had turned into a position with the university's student support services, helping other students navigate complicated family situations and financial independence. It was work that felt meaningful, using my own experience to help people who were struggling with similar challenges. More importantly, I'd built something I'd never had before, a chosen family. Leora had become my closest friend, the kind of person who showed up with soup when I was sick, and listened without judgment when I needed to process the ongoing aftermath of my decision to leave. Mrs. Patterson had evolved from landlord to surrogate grandmother figure, bringing me leftover cookies and offering practical advice about everything from budgeting to dealing with difficult people. There was also Marcus, a fellow adoptee I'd met through one of the online support groups, who'd become my study partner and eventual roommate when we decided to split a 2-bedroom apartment to save money. And Dr. Chen, who I'd started seeing regularly for therapy, not because I was having a breakdown, but because I was finally ready to heal from years of emotional neglect. These people had something in common that my adoptive family never had. They chose to love me without conditions, celebrated my achievements without qualifications, and supported my decisions even when they didn't fully understand them. The contrast became especially clear when I celebrated my 23rd birthday. Unlike the previous year's lonely dinner at a restaurant table set for 5, this birthday was everything I'd always wanted but never dared to ask for. Leora had organized a small party in my apartment, inviting the people who had become my real family over the past year. There was homemade cake, slightly lopsided but made with love, thoughtful gifts that showed people had actually been paying attention to my interests, and most importantly, the kind of genuine joy that comes from being truly seen and valued. Marcus gave me a journal with future best-selling author embossed on the cover, acknowledging my dream of writing a book about my experiences. Mrs. Patterson contributed a vintage typewriter she'd found at an estate sale, saying every serious writer needed proper equipment. Leora's gift was a framed photo of all of us from a picnic we'd had the month before, with a note that read, "Your chosen family loves you exactly as you are." As I blew out the candles, surrounded by people who had never forgotten my birthday, and never would, I felt something I'd spent my entire life searching for: belonging. The aftermath of going public with my story had been complicated but ultimately healing. Camille and Daniel had initially threatened legal action, but their lawyer had apparently explained that truth is a defense against defamation. They'd eventually retreated into damage control mode, telling people in their social circle that I'd been a difficult teenager who never properly bonded with the family. Zephyr had reached out once, about 3 months after the news story aired. He'd called to say that he missed me, and didn't understand why I couldn't just forgive and move on. The conversation had been painful but clarifying, confirming that he genuinely couldn't see the difference in how we'd been treated, because privilege is often invisible to those who possess it. I'd tried to explain, but ultimately realized that Zephyr didn't need to understand my decision for it to be valid. His comfort with the family dynamic didn't negate my right to reject it. The most unexpected development had been the response from my birth family search. Using the information I'd been able to obtain about my original birth certificate, I'd connected with a half-sister I'd never known existed. Sarah lived across the country and had been searching for me for years, wanting to share family medical history and photos of our birth mother, who had passed away 5 years earlier. We'd started corresponding through email and video calls, building a relationship based on mutual curiosity rather than obligation. Sarah didn't try to replace the family I'd left or immediately insert herself into my daily life. Instead, she offered something precious: connection to my origins and answers to questions I'd carried my entire life. Through Sarah, I learned that our mother had struggled with addiction but had talked about me constantly, wondering if I was happy and hoping that someday I might want to know where I came from. She'd kept a box of things for me: meaty baby photos, a hospital bracelet from my birth, letters she'd written but never sent me to that Sarah was eager to share when I felt ready. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion, but it was real in ways that my relationship with the Sterling Wild family had never been. Sarah loved me not because she'd taken me in out of charitable obligation, but because we shared blood and history, and a mutual desire to know each other. My blog had evolved into something bigger, becoming a resource for people navigating complicated family dynamics and identity issues. I'd started speaking at adoption conferences and support groups, sharing what I'd learned about the difference between gratitude and acceptance, between housing and home. The message was always the same: you deserve to be loved for who you are, not appreciated for how convenient you are to have around. You deserve to take up space, to have bad days, to need support, to be imperfect without it being seen as proof that you're fundamentally flawed. Most importantly, you deserve to choose relationships that nourish rather than diminish you, even if that means disappointing people who expected you to accept less than you deserved forever. As I packed up my laptop that evening at Grindstone, preparing to head home to my chosen family, I reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. I'd gone from invisible to visible, from grateful to empowered, from accepting crumbs to demanding the whole meal. The girl who had sat alone at that birthday dinner, convinced she was asking for too much by wanting to be remembered, had been replaced by a woman who knew her worth, and wasn't afraid to insist on it. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.